Hey all, I am John. I had the pleasure of working with Noel on this project, and we decided to talk uniquely about movies. So let's get started. If we could go to the next slide. Yeah, so this project we analyzed the box office and streaming data to provide strategic direction for a newly formed studio, maybe Microsoft. Better late than never. Our analysis explores financial data, user ratings, and viewership data to help guide the division in deciding what types of movies to create. So let's move on to the next slide. So what we did was we used both IMDb and Box Office Mojo to analyze which actors appear in top grossing movies on a recurring basis. You'll see that in this graph here. Um, what I noticed kind of right away is that if you look at the actors below, they are all men. And that is because the top grossing box office movies globally didn't have any female lead roles. And so what we see is a potential opportunity for what others have missed. And so if whoever is starting a streaming service wants to capitalize on this gap, we would suggest to create content with strong female lead roles. Yeah, so we can move on. Actor profitability. So we used both the IMDb and Box Office Mojo again to analyze which actors provide the highest box office numbers. Let's take a look. So look at the bottom left quadrant. You'll see that Marvel did really well. You can see, so the gross here is in billions. And so Robert Downey Jr., his movies brought in close to $1 billion, which is also why he is the highest paid actor. So what we can see here is that the superhero genre is doing really well. And so we could suggest that we should come out with some superhero content, but there's not enough data to really say that definitively, because it seems that Marvel has a pretty strong grip on this genre, and so it could be risky. This just points to we need to do more homework on this, but there's potential here. So yeah, I'll pass this off to Noel now.
Okay, so I looked at return on investment. So I used data from Box Office Mojo and TMDB, and I had film budgets and profit, so I used that to create an ROI, return on investment percentage, and plotted that against the film's budget. And what you see here really is that films with very small budgets have this opportunity to really rise to the top and provide, like you can see, this is like 1,000% return. Plus, I actually had to cut this graph off because there were movies that were like 10,000, 20,000% return. And it made it more difficult to see. Whereas when you get above this $100 million budget mark, you're really not getting a return above 200%, which means you're actually losing the opportunity to make more money on your return. So for that reason, we think that lower budget movies are your best bet, both because they have this opportunity to create this really high rate of return, but also because they cost less. So there's less loss if your movie doesn't do well. Yeah, and you can see, the average movie actually loses $1.2 million when we look at the whole data set, But of the top 50 movies that have the highest ROI, their budget was only $2.75 million and their average profit was $45 million. So it's a huge opportunity to make a lot of money for a smaller investment. And then when we map these genres that have the best ROI, you can see here drama and horror and thriller are really doing well, like disproportionately well compared to other genres. The impact of drama in that list, when we look at the total distribution, is a little bit uninteresting because drama is generally the most popular genre, but thriller down here and especially horror down here are really disproportionately represented in those top 50 return on investment movies. So we feel confident recommending that horror and thriller are safe bets for higher rate of returns. The final thing that we looked at were streaming services. Because of the pandemic, box office data for the last year and a half is really rough. And sometimes for a few months there, it's completely absent. And streaming services are really where people are engaging with content right now. Unfortunately, streaming services also really like to hold their data close. So it can be hard to get a really good, accurate picture. So kind of as a starting point, we used the Netflix's top 10 feature, which shows users the top 10 titles that other people are viewing every day. And the numbers maintains that data. So we looked at the date range of January 1st through May 31st, and looked at the genres of those movies. And what you see is, again, drama very high, but we know that drama is also a most popular genre for movies in general. We don't have data about like the full set of movies that are available on Netflix to know if these genres are disproportionately represented, but we do see that horror, which was a big moneymaker, is very low on this list, and comedy has risen much higher than previously. For horror, it's kind of difficult to say what the impact of this is, again, because we don't know if horror are just not really available on Netflix, or it's possible that horror is a very seasonal genre around Halloween, and this data set is only January through May. So it's possible that horror really spikes in October, and we're just not seeing that with this particular data set. But I think we can more confidently say that comedy is a rising trend for movie genres. So in conclusion, our recommendations are that there's a gap in the market for female-led films, that superhero movies are very trendy but risky. And so a next step would be to kind of explore this Marvel versus other superhero movies a little bit more to see if there's really, Marvel is just holding a monopoly and other people just can't get traction, or if there is opportunity for superhero movies to be made that are not Marvel films. Modest budgets are going to create an opportunity for a higher rate of return while minimizing your losses. And horror and thriller are historically very profitable genres. And we can also see that comedy might be a rising trend. But in order to really like solidify those, we'd want to look at more streaming data and research more into these genres to kind of see what other insights might be able to be obtained. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you so much, John and Noelle. Does anyone have any questions for either John or Noelle? All good. All right, let's move on to Jojo and Katerina.
I'm on here as Michael Pope because I'm on a borrowed computer. Katerina is actually the one doing that will be sharing the slide.
Okay.
So I'm not. give her a minute, I guess.
Yeah, Katarina. Okay.
Sorry, the Zoom thing like disappeared on my computer, so I was trying to find it.
Not to
Here.
worry.
Okay, let's see. Let me share this. Share screen.
All right. Whenever you're ready.
Hello, my name is Joanne De Leon. My partner and I, Katarina Salcido, have some insights and recommendations for Microsoft regarding your upcoming plans for Studio. Thank you for giving us the opportunity to work with you on this exciting endeavor.
Right. Okay, so our motivation was to provide Microsoft with a greater understanding on how to launch a successful movie studio. We wanted to accomplish this by analyzing the types of films and the characteristics that have of films that have performed well in the past. And we think this will give Microsoft the ability to produce high grossing and top rated movies and give them the tools they need to build a highly regarded movie studio. Okay, so our questions fell into two different categories. One of them was what were the movies that have done well and what they had in common. So to answer this, we looked at two data sets from Rotten Tomatoes to get their ratings, as well as other movie characteristics like their genres. We were also interested to see when people are more likely to visit movie theaters and what times of the year brought in the biggest amount of sales. And we looked at the numbers data set for this because it contained information on release dates and both domestic and worldwide grosses. We thought that was important because if we understand consumer patterns, we can, increase Microsoft's likelihood of success with their studio.
First, let's examine the Rotten Tomatoes data. We decided to examine their movie ratings to see which genres were the most rated, no matter the rating, to ascertain which types of movies were most frequently watched, as we hypothesized that the two are related. Please note that the ratings data collected has more than one rating per movie, and moreover, each movie rated often had more than one genre associated with it. To closely examine the distribution of ratings, we subdivided the ratings into high, average, and low. Some ratings were not entered as integers, so we chose to round all ratings to the nearest integer. Rotten Tomatoes ratings are in the range of 0 to 5, and there were about 2,500 ratings over 5, which we chose to half in order to comply with the defined range. Additionally, Rotten Tomatoes ranking has a tomato meter, which is a pass-fail scale. You're shown either a fresh or a rotten tomato. And as such, passing scores are 3, 4, and 5. And high ratings have a score of 4 or 5. And within our data set, there are about 12,000 high ratings, which correspond to 35% of total ratings. And of these high ratings, about 1,600 of them received a score of 5, compared to over 10,000 ratings of 4, revealing that only 5% of all ratings received that top score of 5. Looking more closely at the 4 and 5 ratings, we see that drama and comedy genres have the highest number of ratings compared to other genres, signifying that viewers tend to watch these movies in those categories at a high volume. We have action and adventure, mystery and suspense, and the romance genres containing a significant number of ratings also. Average ratings have a score of 3, and in total, there are about 8,500 average ratings, which accounts for 25% of all ratings. Again, we see that the comedy and drama genres have the highest number of ratings, with action and adventure, mystery and suspense, and romance showing significantly again. However, in this range, science fiction and fantasy additionally shows well. A low rating has a score of 0, 1, or 2. And as you can see from this graph, at 81%, the vast majority of low ratings have a score of 2. There are about 450 ratings of 0, around 2,000 ratings of 1, and about 10,500 ratings of 2. And overall, low ratings account for 39% of total ratings. Looking at more closely at the low ratings here, we have the distribution of 2 ratings in gray, the 1 ratings are in red, and 0 ratings are in blue. Once again, comedy and drama genres tally the greatest amount of ratings in all 3 subsets. And as with the average subset, action and adventure, mystery and suspense, science fiction and fantasy, and romance make significant showings. Here, however, horror makes an appearance where it was insignificant in the passing or fresh categories. For all 3 subsets of ratings, high, average, and low, the same genres are repeatedly represented as the genres with most ratings, namely drama, comedy, action and adventure, mystery and suspense, romance, science fiction and fantasy, art house and international, kids and family, and horror, with classics showing up in the high ratings, but animation being represented in the average and low ratings.
Okay, so we were also curious to see how like the time in which movies were released played a role in how well they performed in theaters. And to answer this, we looked at the numbers data set and compared both monthly and yearly trends from 2000 to 2019 to take in the rate of inflation into account. So we chose to look at I think it's important because finding out which months consumers are more likely to visit movie theaters, we are able to cater to these trends and increase the movie studio profits. So we narrowed down these months to June, July, and November, with February and March coming second to these. We also looked at yearly trends, and looking at the yearly trend, we see that with the exception of 2017 and 2018, box office sales have been declining. Interestingly, 2017, 2018 released a lot of Marvel movies, which is, I think they were talking about the presentation before us, along with like other sequels like Star Wars and yeah. So looking at the yearly trends, I think it's important, and because it provides valuable insights and will help create a successful movie studio if we know the direction in which this industry is heading, and also allow us to anticipate changes and make the necessary adjustments.
Our findings indicate that while building momentum for the studio, concentrating on films in the drama and comedy genres will ensure viewer turnout, as well as introduce the public to the studio's brand. Furthermore, a significant number of viewers watch movies in the action and adventure, mystery and suspense, romance, and science fiction and fantasy genres, no matter the rank of rating, implying that the quality of the films in these genres is irrelevant as to whether a viewer will watch it. Therefore, creating films in these genres will yield a consistent viewership as well as increase exposure of the studio. Moreover, we recommend that Microsoft initially refrain from producing films in the sports and fitness, documentary, gay and lesbian, faith and spirituality, and cult genres, as these were the least rated movies, implying that these genres are the least watched and correspondingly of least interest to viewers.
We also recommend that we aim to release the movies during these peak months of June, July, and November, along with also considering maybe a streaming service to cater to a large audience and take into account that decline. Some limitations of our data included was that our own data only included up to 2019, so we would need more relevant data. We also thought it would be cool to know more about the viewers who are rating the movies, like their age and gender and occupation. I think that would be pretty cool. Some other interesting questions we had was how the pandemic has changed the movies, like how they're produced, their budgets, how they're being released, and like those streaming services and stuff. We were also curious to see what caused that spike in 2017 and 2018. Like what was going on economically and whatever. And we also wanted to investigate more into streaming services and how their relationship with Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Thank you. That's all. If you have any questions, let us know.
Thanks, Katarina and Jojo. Anyone have any questions for Katarina or Jojo? All right, all good. Next up, we have John and Justin.
Hello. Let's see. Okay. Alt tab. Great. Are you seeing the correct screen?
Yes.
Okay. All right.
Alrighty. I'm Jonathan Bragg, and this is my partner, Justin Weibel, and we are here to present to Microsoft Studio developers, CEOs, and leadership about which movies your production team should focus on, your development studio should work on, focus on. You guys want to create original video content, you're going to create a studio, and you're looking for recommendations. And so I'll pass it over to Justin to get over into a summary and the data we used to go about solving this problem.
All right. So the analysis that we performed looked at the performance of movies released between the years 2010 and 2018 at the box office. And we analyzed the movies based solely on popularity and gross revenue. We also looked at the profitability of those movies as it relates to production budgets and their revenues. The data sets that we used came from both IMDb and Box Office Mojo. They were both data sets that were prepared and provided by those websites, so there was no web scraping or API usage involved. And our data set, there was approximately 3,000 movies that were analyzed, some of which were dropped due to irrelevant factors that were irrelevant to our analysis. And all of the movies that were analyzed were released between the years of 2010 to 2018.
Here's a chart of the releases by genre. Based on our analysis, the most common genres for movie releases are drama, comedy, action, and adventure, as you can see on the bottom of the chart. And because of the number of movies released in those genres, competition could be high, which takes us to the next slide. Where based on our analysis, genres again have the highest gross revenues, and again, historically, drama, action, adventure generate the most revenue. And so there is opportunity, even though it is a market, that has some saturation because of the opportunity to get high gross revenues. We think that's an area that your studio should investigate.
So we also looked at popularity of each genre by year. This was generated from the column in the data set that related to the number of votes that used to generate the ratings on IMDb. So it shows consumer engagement with that particular data set. So we normalized the data and created a chart that shows that over the years, movie studios were correct in releasing in action, adventure, comedy, and drama, because they are clearly the four most popular genres of movies among moviegoers. So they were clearly correct in focusing on those. And you see that there are a whole heck of a lot of ones that are not necessarily quite as popular, that even though they do sometimes perform well in revenue streams. So to compare the two, we compared those 9 genres and their popularity by year, along with the total gross revenue that they received in those genres each year. And when you compare the two charts, you see that there is kind of a very similar trend between how the trend line moves in each individual graph. So it likely indicates there's a correlation that the more popular a movie genre is, the more revenue it does generate. We also did an analysis on a trend line of budget versus total gross revenue, trying to see if high budget movies generally produce higher gross revenues. And as you can see with the trend line, it does indicate that there is a positive correlation between it, although you can see that there are quite a few outliers where some higher budget movies didn't perform as well as the trend line and some lower budget movies outperformed the trend line. There's a correlation there. What outside factors might affect this, whether the movie's just flat out bad, who knows? But there is a correlation generally that more money you put in, the more money you probably will receive back.
So our three biggest business recommendations for the studio. Number one, drama, action, comedy, and adventure movies should receive the most investment for the production because of their popularity at the box office. And while your studio competitors are also focused on these genres, the popularity is high enough that revenue should not suffer. So you should plan to be profitable in these despite the competition. And the third recommendation that we have is to lean into higher budgets because a higher production budgets tend to result in higher revenues. Although this is not always the case and is a place for further analysis.
Now, the next steps that we would like to look at is that our data sets that we used only cover the period from 2010 to 2018. Some more recent data from 2019 to 2021 would be helpful to determine current and up-to-date trends in terms of box office performance in movies. Additional analyses on streaming services would also be helpful because there has been a rise in popularity of services like Netflix and Amazon Prime, and a lot of movie studios are releasing direct to those services rather than releasing them to the box office itself. So that could also negatively affect the performance of your movie at the box office if it's in a genre that typically does well on streaming platforms. The third step is COVID happened. So movie theaters were largely closed between 2020 and into early 2021, and have still not fully reopened. So one recommendation would be to hold off on further analyses of what the future of the movie industry looks like until more data is acquired as to what the landscape looks like post-COVID in terms of what people are going back to the box office to see, how many people are going back to the box office, to the theaters to even watch movies, or how many people are just sitting on their couches and would prefer to watch it in the comfort of their own home. And thank you. That was our presentation. Thank you for your time.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Any questions for John or Justin? All right. Well, last but not least, we have a team of three. We have Harrison, Taylor, and Naomi.
Hang on, let me get my screen share done. I can't figure out how to end it.
Yeah, I can end it.
Okay. All right. Got it.
Let me get my screen share going. Hello. All right. You guys see the presentation?
Yep.
Okay. So good afternoon or good morning, depending on your time zone. Today, myself, Taylor, and my co-authors and partners, Naomi Weinberger and Harrison Gu, will present the recommendations for the development of an original film content series for Microsoft Studios. To make such recommendations, we dove into some provided data sets and made an API call to flesh out the information a bit. The sources that we used are the movie database provided data set with some information pulled from the movie database API. The movie database is a community built, an online resource built by a community, and it is a movie and TV database. We also worked with a provided data set from The Numbers, which is a free resource for industry professionals and the investment community, and it's another online resource. And we also worked with some provided data sets from IMDb, which is an Amazon company, and it provides metadata for movie, TV, and video game series. Our analysis focuses on characteristics of films with the highest ROI. So return on investment is expressed as a percentage throughout this
presentation and was calculated using the revenue and production budget values. For the purposes of this analysis, we are using revenue to mean gross revenue and production budget to mean production cost. We subset the data into high, medium, and low budget films after our initial analysis revealed the positive relationship between investment and revenue. Using this subset, we dove into characteristics of the films, such as rating, genre, director, runtime, and release timing to see how these variables were related to returns. Like I said, our primary indicator of performance across films was % ROI, as we were interested in a measure that would appropriately represent the true impact and value of a film. In some instances, we also used user rating as a metric. In percent, with ROI as our primary performance indicator, we dug into many characteristics of recent high budget films, and by recent, I mean since the year 2000. And we took a look at how film releases perform over the course of the year with regard to release timing. So I'll pass it off to Harrison.
Yeah, so the first thing that I analyzed was how the budget influences the return on investment. Some parameters that I used, or that we used, as Taylor said, were we only analyzed films from 2000 and later. This is just because we feel like trends and movie taste might be changing throughout the years, and we thought that this time period was the most relevant. And for low budget films, there were 1 million to 50 million. Medium budget was 50 million to 100 million, and high budget films were anything that's above 100 million. So we recommend that Microsoft focus on producing high budget films. So if you look at the graph on the right here, low budget films have a slightly higher mean, but this is actually unreliable because it looks like that they have a heavy right skew. Two things point to this. One, the median is significantly lower than the mean, and the standard deviation is astronomically high. And you see that the mean is the lowest by far out of the three categories. So while there are a few low budget films that perform really well, the majority of them actually underperform. That said, high budget films, the mean is slightly lower than low budget films, but it has the highest median, which means that the majority of high budget films will outperform. And it also has the lowest standard deviation, which gives it the most predictable outcome, giving us a more risk-averse option. The second thing that I analyzed was film MPA ratings. This is like PG, PG-13, or rated R movies. So the conclusion here, it kind of depends on Microsoft's risk tolerance. They all have similar medians, but rated R movies have significantly higher mean, which means it has a higher expected return. However, you'll also notice on the graph on the right that rated R movies have a slightly higher downside risk. We analyze downside risk by looking at the 10 to 50 percentile, and you'll see that rated R movies kind of outperform or underperform PG and PG-13 up until about the 65th percentile. So while rated R movies offer the highest expected return, it is a little bit risky. So if Microsoft has lower risk tolerance, we recommend that they produce rated PG movies. This is because they have the highest median, which means the majority of the films will slightly outperform. And while their mean is lower than rated R, it's still slightly higher than that of PG-13. And finally, they do offer the lowest downside risk. Again, looking at the 10th to 50th percentile.
Next, we looked at which genres were rated the highest. So if you look here, we have the top 15 genres. We filtered out genres that were lower rated and ones that were not actually films. like game shows, music videos, reality TV that were included in our data set. Our data came from IMDb, and because there was no ROI available for this, we used user ratings. So that's definitely a limitation in looking at this, but we have over here the distribution of ratings of genres throughout the different ratings. So if you look over here, it happens to be that most of them are in the 6 to 7 rating. They're rated between 6 and 7. The median is between 6 and 7. But if you look, the top 5 would be documentary, biography, history, sport, and war. But again, they're all really within the same median range. So it really just depends on other factors as well. So you can definitely make a high rated movie that is in a different genre as well. Next slide, Taylor. So another characteristic that we looked at was the top rated directors, because again, we want to look at as many characteristics as possible to try to get a high rated film. And these were our top 10 directors over here.
So after directors, we took a look at how the runtime and performance vary together. So I took a look at how the runtimes of films were distributed, over the last 20 years. And the plot on the left that you can see is that distribution. So it shows a left, not severe, but a left skew, and it shows that the majority of runtimes existing, the majority of the runtimes for those films were between 100 and 130 minutes. However, if you take a look at the plot on the right, I plotted the runtime against the percent ROI, and you can see that after the runtime passes 140 minutes, the percent ROI becomes more variable, but it is consistently higher. So with that in mind, it's our recommendation that Microsoft produce films with longer than 140 minutes for the possibility of a higher percent return. And last, we took a look at how the timing of a release affected the returns. So analysis revealed a correlation between release timing and return on investment. On the plots, you can see the mean, which is indicated by a blue line, and the median, which is indicated with an orange line. The plot on the left is gross revenue and by release month, and the plot on the right is percent ROI by release month. They look fairly similar. You'll note that there's a spike in returns in April and sort of through the summer into June and July. And then there is another spike in November. December appears to do well in the context of the rest of the year, but the ROI and gross revenue values have more variability. Another observation from our analysis was that most films are released on Fridays. Performance is best on Fridays, and so we recommend that releases occur on Fridays.
So in conclusion, in order to maximize ROI, we recommend that Microsoft focus on producing higher budget films. Again, this is any budget over 100 million, and also focus on producing rated R movies. Unless they have a focus on risk aversion, then it can be PG movies. We also recommend that Microsoft produce films that are longer than 140 minutes, and that they try to release their movies in April or November, and preferably on a Friday. We also recommend that in order to get the highest ratings, that Microsoft focuses on producing documentaries, biographies, history, and movies that have to do with war and sports. And the directors that would give them the highest ratings are Lindsay Thompson, Ivana Denizi, Matt Hopkins, Masahiro Hayakawa, Sodabe Mora. Sorry. Yeah, sorry for butchering that. And then the last slide. Yeah. And then in our next steps, we think that we can explore our ROI with the IMDb information, and also maybe get a little bit more updated information on that. We can also analyze specific subsections. So for example, even though low comedy films tend to underperform, it could be possible that low budget comedy films in particular have really high ROIs. So that could be something that's interesting. We also thought that it would be good to explore the effects of streaming services, mainly because of how the movie landscape has changed in the past year. It seems like movie theaters are becoming a little bit more obsolete, while a ton of different streaming services are becoming more popular. And yeah.
So thank you all.
Yep.
Oh, yeah. Thank you for your time and attention today. The link to the GitHub repo for this analysis is in the presentation, and our contact information is also available. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you, Taylor, Naomi, and Harrison. Any questions for these folks? Perfect. All right. Well, I gotta say right off the bat, super impressed with your presentations, especially for the first one. I mean, not even that it's the first one. I feel like a common thread that I saw is a lot of you did think about your problem from a business context. A lot of your analysis did not just take the graphs for granted, and you did consider outside factors that probably were not represented in these data sets. So really props to all of you, and for completing your first project, congratulations. Some announcements. So schedule your project review with me off of my booking link. I think about half of you have already scheduled this as of before we started our presentation. So those of you who haven't yet, please do either next week or week after, but preferably next week. Also, Friday is a Flatiron school holiday because of Juneteenth. So because of Juneteenth, we will not be having any study groups or instructor support on Friday. However, if you have questions, if you're working on stuff, please ask each other questions on Slack. Slack will be there. Other than that, the deadline to pass your review is going to be the 25th. So let's say we do our review and I have you make more changes. The changes will have to be done by the 25th. Any questions about that? Oh, and submit your project on Canvas the night before your review, just because I usually review your projects. I usually skip through everyone's projects in the morning of the day of review. So make sure that that is in. Any questions regarding this project or any deadlines coming up? All right, well, you don't have to do anything this weekend, although like some of you, I think you want to like clean up your notebooks or whatever, but take a very well-deserved break this weekend. And let me stop the recording and we can get into our weekly check-in.